one of the best ways to start is I love to start about talking about the pain points of content marketing and what are potential solutions for those pain points. And specifically, what are the mistakes that a lot of folks make when these days, everyone's kind of a publisher, right? It's not media outlets anymore. Like every brand, every company, whether you're B2C or B2B, you're creating something because you want to be relevant and you want awareness and you want to pull people into your lead or customer funnel. And you just know you have to serve the audience to serve your own business goals. So I want to talk about that to start off with. I'm going to share my screen, tell you a little bit about how we think about the world, and then we're going to delve in. The agenda today is let's break down some of the most biggest content marketing mistakes. Let's go in and talk about how stackable content, what it is and how it can solve some of those mistakes or those pain points. We're going to give you some examples of what a content stack looks like and how it might change your entire process of how you create content. And then we're also going to take you through what is the ideal process of creating content in this more efficient and scalable manner. So if that sounds good, I'm going to share my screen right now. And what you should see here is the power of stackable content. And only, I think, 3 or 4 slides about our view of the world. And then I promise the rest is actually all about you. So just as a way of introduction, I'm the CEO of Top Global. We have 12 different agencies, all wholly owned, all by us. I'm the CEO of each one. But we all have different specialties and do different things. So we're going to actually draw upon, for today's presentation, resources from a combination of PR Hacker, Top Creative, which is a creative agency, Top Data, which is a market research agency. I'll explain how data fits into this. And then we'll follow up with some kind of applications from Top Digital, which is our digital agency, as well as some of the industry-specific agencies like Top Health and Top Tech. So we're going to draw upon about maybe the work by about 5 or 6 different agencies today. In terms of our capabilities, we're kind of zooming into the gold there on content marketing, but there's lots of other things, more than 35 different disciplines that we work in across 7 different groups. But in particular, I think content marketing, in my mind, is perhaps, of these, maybe the biggest sea change in how we implement content marketing over the past 5 years from all of these different disciplines. There's been a lot of changes. I do a series of webinars called The New Rules and where I break down the new rules of each discipline. But in particular, content marketing, I think, has really changed and really shifted in the past 5 years. What we're doing today doesn't even resemble what we were doing 5 years ago. And so I think we're going to break down some of that today. And then finally, just to give you a little context for the types of companies we do stackable content with, we started with a lot of scrappy startups that came from incubators like Y Combinator and Techstars and fast-growing companies. And then we started doing a lot of work for big brands like the Budweisers and the Mercedes and the American Expresses of the world. So I'm going to pull some examples from kind of a wide range of companies. So no matter if you're small and scrappy, you're big and trying to get market share with tough competitors, we should have something for you. And finally, I actually want to explain how I started thinking about stackable content. This is me. I can't believe it. 20 plus years ago now. That's me on the cover of a book I wrote in a whole prior life and career. It was a book called How to Go to College Almost for Free. And how I started learning about content stacks from a personal perspective was I'd put all this effort into a book. And then I realized suddenly, some people consume books, but a lot of people consume ideas and content in different ways. So how did originally I take what was in this book and deploy that in a video format or deploy that in bite-sized pieces so I could go on the Oprah Winfrey Show or the Today Show or National Public Radio? Then how do I take some of that and spin that into social? And then might there be a more efficient way to go about all of this? So everything I'm going to talk about today, right now it's based on our client work, but it actually goes back 20 plus years when I thought, well, okay, writing the book was the hard part, but then I realized actually the book was only one channel and I needed to deploy this in many, many channels. So that being said, let's start off with, and feel free to post your questions. Jackson's going to jump in, flag me down if you have specific questions as we go. But let's start off with, what are the biggest content marketing mistakes? And specifically, what are some of the biggest issues that brands have? We see it all the time. We're often brought in to fix these mistakes, or people who are really new to digital or content marketing. What are some of the trouble spots? So mistake number 1 is making content that has no clear audience. Even the content itself might be compelling. It might be actually good, But if it doesn't have a clear audience that can understand its value, appreciate its value, it can find it, it becomes very difficult to generate ROI from the content. So each piece of content you create needs to have a very, very clear audience that is a reachable audience. And the more clarity you have on that, generally, the more ROI you can have from the content. So we'll talk about how content stacks give you clarity in terms of the audience, but that's mistake number one. You take the approach that if we build it, they will come. And the problem is you've got to say, if I know they will come, then I'll build it. You got to reverse the order. Mistake number two is failing to extract all the return on investment that is possible from the time investment you put into creating content. So what happens is very, very common with companies is typically companies these days have pretty big content creation departments. And there's like, okay, we're spending, sometimes 2 or 3 months creating something, and it's not one person. I've seen a lot of it where it's like, 20 people are touching this piece of content. And then it goes into a white paper. Maybe we put the white paper on our website. Maybe we gate it because we want to have leads. So we make people put in their email. And then we maybe issue a press release, or maybe there's a bit of PR. And then it's like, okay, we're done with that. Let's go on to the next one. And so I actually typically see there's a lot of ROI to be extracted from companies that sometimes have content that they've been doing for years, but have really not fully exploited. So that's mistake number two, not fully exploiting all of the content you create. And we'll talk about how stackable content can help you do that. Mistake number three, building a content calendar that has no unified message. Very, very common is you'll have, okay, a prolific content creating brand or company will be like, okay, we're going to come together. We're going to brainstorm our content calendar. Here's the 20 things we're going to do across these channels in the month of October. But all individually, they might be fine, but collectively, there's no consistent message. It isn't laddering back to a business goal. It doesn't communicate something, not just the context, but the subtext. What are you trying to communicate? What are you trying to say about your company, about your expertise, about the value your products provide? There's no throughput because we're getting lost in the midst of all the content we're creating. Very, very common mistake number three. Mistake number four, spending 90% of your time on content creation and 10% or less on actually distributing that content. This is actually common because, 20 years ago, I was an author, very common for authors, actually. You spend all of your time like writing the book, and then now you've got like all these books sitting around. You're like, no one's reading it. What do I do with it? So very common for companies is all of the investment is content creation. All of the planning is content creation. Very little on content distribution beyond the outlets posted up on the website. Mistake number 5 out of, I believe, 6 here. No adaptation of content to different consumption patterns. So typically we dictate how people should experience our content. Like, we're delivering you a white paper. You need to go through a white paper. Or, we're going to give you a podcast episode. That's how you're going to get it. Or we're going to give you this blog post. So that content, there's many, many different consumption patterns based on your core audiences and your core personas of that audience. Some people might, be very attentive to processing it. They're going to sit down on their computer. They're going to really pay attention. Other people are going to be like, they're going to be half listening or watching. They're going to consume it while doing something else, right? It's, they prefer to listen to podcast episodes while they're running or working out at the gym, and you're only going to have part of their focus. Or other people are going to have a very short attention span, right? They're just going to consume something for, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. And then if it has great value, they'll come back to it or not. Some people are visual learners, some are auditory learners, some are kinetic learners. So the problem is we tend to get in a single mode that people are going to consume it. And really, there's actually lots of people that might be interested in it, but we got to give them different entry points, different ways in to consume our core ideas. Okay, so that's mistake number 5. And finally, mistake number 6, making monolithic single channel content. So what I see a lot of is, this is going to be our big data study for the year. This is our big, report on this. And we do these monolithic, huge projects when actually we could take pieces of that and spread it out and derive value from it throughout the entire year. We can take that monolithic report and turn it into industry-specific reports in addition to the monolithic report. We could take that, that big data study and turn it into studies for different groups, different demographic groups, or socioeconomic groups, or geographic markets. So there's a lot more we can do when we think about content stacks. It lends itself to solving those, like, kind of put all our eggs in one basket kind of content problems. So Jackson, before I continue, I just want to stop there and see if there's any other comments or questions. And just to reiterate, and let us know in the channel, do you guys have any of these problems, which are very common? I guarantee you're not the only one. Do you make content that has no clear audience? What about failing to extract all ROI from the time investment, right? You might be doing a lot of stuff, but you don't really see the returns. Are you making content that's all over the place? It really doesn't have any unified message. Are you spending 90% or more of your time on content creation and don't really have a distribution strategy or plan? Are you forcing people to consume content how you want them to consume it as opposed to adapting to their needs? And finally, are you making monolithic, really big content that takes a lot of time and it's typically single channel as well? So Jackson, any comments, questions, or thoughts from the group or yourself, because you create a lot of content for our clients too.
Sure. I think the big through line that I'm seeing in the chat, and I've seen this sort of question posed 3 or 4 ways, is really just folks wondering, how do I get more mileage out of the content I'm creating, right? Like I make a lot of content that I just don't feel gets the sort of exposure I'd like it to get. And I know that's a theme we're going to be touching on a lot here. I think that there's one specific question coming in though from John Colado that may be worth addressing here. He says, how do you create different tones of contact with an audience, especially with technical or jargon heavy content, right?
Sure.
I think that's a good question, because particularly when you're looking at different channels, a tone that's appropriate for Facebook or Instagram may not be appropriate for LinkedIn, or the tone for an email newsletter might be different than your blog, right? And so I think that's a question that probably a lot of us can relate to.
Sure, and actually, I think we'll get more into that when we see the content stacks, but let me do a short answer right now. Actually, thank you for the question, John. I think, number one, I think you actually got to separate the content from the tone, meaning the content is the content, but we can express that content in many different ways. And in general, for real technical subjects, we have a lot of kind of real technical B2B clients. I think almost always it could be made more simple and less jargon heavy, because sometimes some of those clients of ours will say, well, we have a very sophisticated audience, right? They're a very technical audience. Well, that's true, but even a technical audience, if you only have 10% of their focus because they're doing 5 other things at once, it needs to be simple so they can consume it. But based on the channel you're in, there's some, once you separate the content and tone, there's some important things you can do. And what we generally find is there's a consistent voice from a brand, but actually the tone can shift based on how you're presenting information. And I think I'll show you that in the content stack coming up. So let me jump over and let me explain what stackable content is by answering this question. Can we solve these problems and make content creation less costly and more impactful, which is essentially, the holy grail of content marketing? So let me introduce you to stackable content. What stackable content is the process of making content creation more efficient, more effective, and ultimately more scalable by first creating your most important original material and then distilling derivative content from it. So instead of saying that, I don't know, 20 or 30 pieces of content we're going to create this month, let's say, is all equal. It's all equivalent, right? It's just different topics, different tracks, different subject areas, different purposes, but they're all essentially equal. Instead, let's create a hierarchy. And let's create a hierarchy which at the top is our most important content. And we're going to do that and think about that first. And then we're going to derive other content from it. And we would call that content pillar content to start. And so here's what this looks like. So for a content stack, our nomenclature is that there is pillar content at the top, then macro content, micro content, and nano content. Let's define these. Pillar content is the core piece of long form content that we use as primary source material. So whatever period our kind of period of content creation is, that could be a month, that could be a week, that could be a quarter. We're going to start defining our content pillars first. And that's the basis of everything we create. Then we're going to go through and create macro content, which are also major content pieces that amplify the key ideas contained in that pillar content. Then we'll create micro content, which is kind of a mashup of pillar and macro content that is recut for new platforms and audiences. And finally, we'll create nano content. That's the really small bite-sized pieces of derived content that are reinvented and reimagined for more engagement. So a way to kind of see this in action is this is what a content stack looks like. Let's say this is for a month or for a week. So we start with that single piece of pillar content. We'll talk about soon about how you figure out what that is. We might have 3 pieces of macro content that really amplify it. We might have 5 pieces of micro content that allow different entry points across different channels. And then finally, that might resolve in 7 pieces of nano content that further explore that. So this is a whole hierarchy. This is a whole tree based on a core idea. But one of the keys is this isn't just smaller pieces. As we go through this process of going from pillar to macro to micro to nano, we find different ways to reinvent and reimagine what we're doing. So let me show you kind of how this works for a typical company, a client of ours. Their pillar content may be a core explainer or anthem video, a data study, a white paper, maybe a webinar. That becomes the pillar content that they're going to base everything off of. The macro content becomes individual, a video segment, a shorter video, an email newsletter, a post, a blog post, maybe a data visualization, an infographic. Then they have micro content. So that's like a LinkedIn post, a social media post, an email blast. Then there's nano content, which is an animated GIF or a tweet storm or a meme or a social carousel, maybe an Instagram story, maybe something else that's in a bite-sized piece. And actually, for a lot of our clients now, this isn't always just the official company channel. Sometimes we're making content stacks that we'll deploy on, the personal social channels of the C-suite or the founder or other people too, as part of that content stack. So the point of this is that we've become pretty platform agnostic. And that's one of the things that for those, clients of ours who hire us, they kind of love that about us, that it doesn't matter if we're creating a long form article or, a video or a webinar or a podcast episode or a graphic, visualization. For us, it's all content. So we can do any of it. We can do all of it. We can do some of it. And you don't have to scope out different agencies for each part. If you're thinking about this and doing it on your own, the more agnostic you can become, the more you can deploy these content stacks in really interesting ways. Jackson, do we have a question?
Yeah, I think there's a very relevant question coming in right now from Yvonne, who said, should we share the same content on all our platforms? I've always heard that's a no-no, that you should have different content for different platforms, even if the message is the same. The graphics shouldn't be. Many companies I follow have the same exact content on their Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. What do you think about the mindset here?
Okay, well, it's a great question. Thank you, Yvonne. I think one important thing is that it's got to be appropriate to the channel. I think Jackson alluded to that earlier. And it's very hard often for the same actual creative. What I mean is the same post to be really appropriate on multiple channels. Usually what you're doing, if you're kind of reusing the same thing all over, is you're kind of going for the lowest common denominator, right? It sort of works, so let's use it. Now, I actually don't think there's anything inherently wrong with deploying content across multiple channels if it's appropriate for that channel. But I actually think what's appropriate can really change. I also think there's an opportunity to reinvent the same content with different positioning to make it perform better. And so that's another issue, is that you're using the same content over and over again. It tends to not perform great on every channel because each channel performance is different. Let me give you an example from one of our sort of client stackable content work. So for a piece of pillar content, we were actually interviewing the former publicist for Steve Jobs. You can see here, she's one of the Andys featured in the Steve Jobs movie, if you've kind of watched those. And one of the things that she was talking about was actually a broader topic about how to understand your company culture and how that understanding of your company culture informs how you position the brand. So she had been a publicist many years ago. She kind of became a brand strategist, and we were talking about that. Now, as we went to the content stacks and as we started deploying across different channels, there's lots of interesting things she said on company culture, but she actually did this story aside when she talked about, and she was half joking, which was how she got fired by Steve Jobs 5 times, right? Pretty demanding boss. Also, she was half joking because if she got fired 5 times, she also got hired 5 times too, right? Just a demanding guy. So she related this whole interesting story. So, on some channels, we led with, this like what you can learn about company culture from Andy. On some, we kind of played the Steve Jobs angle, what you can learn about company culture from Steve Jobs, because some of the way she approached things was based on her work with Steve Jobs, and he's famous. We could leverage that. And some of it was like actually called How I Got Fired by Steve Jobs 5 Times, right? Totally different headline, totally different approach, totally different for a certain type of channel, but it brought people in a different way. It was based on actually very similar video clips, which we then transcribed. We created static graphics and quotes, but the expression of it was very different in the channel. So what I would say is, 80% of all this content was the same across channels, but that last 20% really adapted the headline, adapted the format, gave people a different way in. We did a ton of experimentation, right? We also wanted to know, like, if we lead with Steve Jobs, does that perform better than without leading with Steve Jobs? Many questions. So what I would say, Yvonne, to answer your question is that the most important thing of that is that it's optimal for the channel and that it's optimal to get the engagement and performance that you want. I think it's rare that sticking everything everywhere exactly the same is optimal. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but if you want your content to perform better, it's got to be appropriate, I think, to the channel. So thank you. Great question. And I'll give you an example more of that in just a second. So let's move on to this next question, which is, how does stackable content help solve our biggest content pain points? And specifically, what are the aspects of stackable content that relate to this whole first part of this webinar when we talked about what are the biggest mistakes? So here's some of the benefits. Stackable content is more efficient. What it allows you to do when you think in terms of this pillar content and then you derive macro, micro, and nano content is that you can make original content once and deploy it many times. Like I mentioned, it's not the same content exactly deployed many times, but it's reimagined, mashed up, redeployed, reinvented, re-edited, but it's all based on the same core concepts. So you can make once and deploy many. So that's one way it helps solve our problems. Number 2, stackable content is more effective. So by basing your content based on that core, message, that pillar content, your content tends to be more on message because it is derived from a single source. So very common for our clients is that we'll have like a piece of pillar content for, let's say, a month or a 2-week sprint, sort of bi-weekly. And it's more on message because we're deriving everything out of a consistent idea. People get more, the audience, what we're trying to say. Internally in our company, they understand it. They're like, oh, this is the month where we're really focused on this aspect of our product or our brand. Great, I get it. This is what we're pushing out. This is what we're communicating. So number 2, it's more effective. Number 3, it's naturally multi-channel. You can more easily adapt content into new formats. So because we're thinking in content stacks and because we have this concept of micro and nano content, which is going to get us into a lot of different, for instance, social channels and digital channels, we're naturally thinking multi-channel from the beginning. That's useful and solves that, remember that pain point about monolithic single channel content. Number 4, stackable content plays to your strengths. This is one thing that I think a lot of people miss out on, and this is how you create an optimal stackable content process, which is you can create content in your strongest medium and then deploy elsewhere. So what that means is if you are great at doing, long form written content, you can do that first and then adapt it to, let's adapt the video or the webinar topic or the newsletter or the social post from it. Maybe you're the opposite and you're great at doing podcasts or webinars or speeches at conferences. So then you can do that first and then let's get it transcribed. Let's highlight the 6 most important parts of the transcript. Then let's deploy that into different social forms, right? So what's nice about it is you can go to your strongest area, whatever your team is strongest in, do that, and then use that to derive other channels from it. Number 5, stackable content creates more ROI. We as an agency, one of the things that I love that we're hired to do a lot is a company will come to us and say, hey, Ben, team, Jackson, we've got, 2 years of content we've created sitting there in an archive. And we kind of posted it once and that was it. And we did nothing else with it. Can you come do an audit and inventory of everything that we have and then come back with a plan that shows us how to redeploy that and across, these new channels and get more OI and drive, we want to drive 100 more leads. Can you help us do that? And that's what we come in and do. So you can get future value from prior content, number 5. And number 6, finally, stackable content is iterative. So what it allows you to do is each content improvement you make, say in pillar content or macro content, those bigger content pieces, you make it better, it enhances the next piece of content in the sequence, right? If you make pillar content iteratively better, you're actually making your micro content, your nano content better too. So there tends to be a better feedback loop by being more focused first. So before I go in and show this in process, I just want to kind of pause there. And Jackson, is that pretty clear on your end what stackable content is and what are its benefits? What basically, if we're going to summarize here, and I don't know if there's questions about it, we're seeing stackable content, less investment of time and money because you're more focused, more on message because you start with that pillar and it helps keep you on message. We're seeing more iterative, faster learning, more ROI. You can base it on more of your strengths and your strong areas and deploy. And for that reason, you sort of, get your cake and eat it too, because it's like less investment, but also more returns at the same time based on this kind of process and system.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Ben. Some of the questions that are coming up at this point, and I see one right now from Stephanie. I also saw a similar question come in from John, is really about, kind of what are the different tones that you want to hit for different channels? Or like, how is it if you compare the channels against each other, how is it that you should speak to each channel individually as you're kind of breaking out all of this content into its various stacks?
Sure. And it's a great question. And I'm going to actually put up a slide on and show you what a channel guide looks like for us, for one of our clients. Let me give you some quick examples now. So one, understand what the purpose of the medium is. So for instance, I have a lot of, brands now that more and more brands want to be like, get into podcasting. Well, what is the purpose of podcasting? What is a podcast good at delivering that better than other content formats? Well, a podcast is a passive medium, right? It's long form. Typically it's like 30, episodes that are longer. It's in a format where it can be consumed passively. So you can be driving in the car, you can play it, you can do your workout, your run, and it tends to be sequential. So you'll come back for more. So podcast is great for developing a relationship with your audience and building trust. That's what a podcast does better than anything else. So if you know that, the question was, what is your tone? Well, your tone should be something that has a longer term view and that has a trust building, relationship building view, because that's what that format is really good for. Versus, let's say, short form video. What is short form video good for? Short form video is great for engagement and understanding in a way that basically gets people faster into a deeper understanding level. The engagement level of video is higher. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone likes it more. What it means is that if people watch it through, you generally have higher engagement. So maybe the purpose of video is very different, because the purpose of video for in your content stack might be, let's say, to deliver the essentials of what is in your whole demo process. If you're like a B2B company, you got this elaborate demo and slide deck. Maybe the purpose of the video is to deliver the demo experience to those who have yet to experience a live demo, let's say. So that purpose would be different. And maybe that is totally different from the purpose of your LinkedIn post. And the LinkedIn post is great because its purpose is to engage in a personalized way that is appropriate to someone's role or industry, right? It can be more targeted on LinkedIn. So it can be more specific. So your tone there might be appropriate to whatever industry you're in and what you're doing. So that's really important, is basically understanding what are the strengths of each format and then using those strengths. Now, you can build a relationship using video rather than, or trust using video rather than a podcast. It's just not as good, right? Podcast is better for that. So hopefully that answers your question, and we'll hit that more when I show the stack here. So let's go here to what does a content stack actually look like? And I want to give you an example from some client work that, let's say this pillar content creation, one of our agency's top data is great at creating data studies and reports to turn companies and individuals into like rapid thought leaders. So one of the things we created was we did this pandemic wellness survey. We did the whole survey ourselves. We wrote the survey, we administered the survey. We're great at doing, surveys in 48 hours or less anywhere in the world. So we did this survey, and that became the pillar content, which was expressed in a short white paper, right? White paper, maybe a little bit more elaborate sounding. It wasn't that. We just kind of summarized the results in sort of a digital document. Now, from that pillar content, here's how it was deployed. So we took results, and this was the macro content level. So we started with the pillar, which was kind of the survey and the white paper report. Then we had a video segment that featured some of those results, that 84% of Americans seek new experiences to be happy. We sort of were talking about the need for new experiences and wellness, even in a pandemic where your experiences tend to be the same because you're repeating things at home quite a bit. So we talked about that in a video segment that sort of had some of the highlights from that survey. We also had, for macro content, a blog post where we said over half of the US values experiences over possessions. So one of the things was we were kind of laddering into experiences because this is a brand that delivers a lot of experiences. And so we said, okay, people value that. We had kind of a blog post that went further into that. That was macro content. We also had a macro content infographic where we actually said, are you getting outdoors enough? So we took, a subset of experiences, which is outdoors, and then we dove deeper into that macro content. Then we had a Twitter post that was micro content that was like Arizona residents ranking top in US for love of road trips. So we actually went with that with Twitter, and that was like very localized, right? Different headline. And then we had a LinkedIn post that took a different side of it. With that, it said 65% of employers now say they encourage remote work. So what was so because LinkedIn is obviously a career and work-oriented platform, workplace-oriented, we shifted it and went away from outdoors, and we kind of went into remote work. And then we had a Facebook post actually, and Facebook's actually nice as a really a retargeting platform. I know people say, well, if you're like, for instance, if you're a B2B company, what are you doing on Facebook? Well, what's nice is you actually, might target people with a digital ad campaign on LinkedIn, track them to a page, pixel them, and retarget them on Facebook. The reason it's a lot cheaper than LinkedIn, and you can just be, and once you have their pixeled, you can still target them. So Facebook posts, we might say, totally reinvented headline. You can see here, 39% say they have nature deficit disorder. That's one of our blueprints, which is called the disease blueprint, where we summarize pain points in terms of a catchy name that sounds like a disease. In this case, nature deficit disorder. So that was micro content. And then we had micro content. We had a new email newsletter to their audience, which was like, what is your vacation persona type? And we compared persona types for how you like to experience wellness on a vacation compared to the results of the data study. And then we had nano content, which was an animated GIF that highlighted different stats from that study, which is that 84% of Americans say they feel more calm when they're outdoors. 33% say pets are an essential part of any road trip. My little terrier Ginger is roaming around somewhere in the back here. And then 49% of people say that bodies of water make them smile. So those were kind of three just interesting stats deployed as nano content. And then we had an Instagram post also as nano content that took a different angle, which said 33% say digital detox is not a nice to have, and we're all digital now during the pandemic. So digital detox is an essential, not a luxury. So Jackson, I'll just pause there, and I know there's questions for the group or just your thoughts even, Jackson, on this content stack. I think what I want to show is it was essentially a data study and a white paper, deployed it lots of different ways, but notice every headline was different. This was not the same content. Sometimes we actually even reused a picture. That wasn't the key thing. This was a sample. We want to kind of show this at a high level, but we were reinventing and making this appropriate to every different platform. And our tone was similar in the voice, right? But the tone was changing compared to, what is your vacation persona, which was very different than 65% of employers say they encourage remote work. Totally different in how we kind of manage that.
Yeah, man, I really think this speaks to the idea that, if a user's on LinkedIn, or if they're looking at newsletters in their email inbox, or if they're on Facebook, the reasons that they're on those platforms are different, right? If they're on Facebook or they're on Instagram, they're probably looking to be entertained, right? If they're on LinkedIn, they're probably looking for content that's relevant to work. There's kind of different reasons why people engage with different platforms, and I think it's important to build that into the kinds of content that we're actually presenting to our users, our audiences.
Right. And not only that, you can actually measure and you can see and you can go with hypotheses and have experiments, and then you're going to get feedback on it. So usually what will come in and say, our hypothesis is that, okay, if we go with a more data-driven approach on LinkedIn, people are going to respond to those stats better. Let's say that's one. Or we could say, you know what, let's connect LinkedIn to more like really timely, relevant moments in the culture, in the news cycle. That's going to get us better. So there's a lot we can do. So what I would say is that not only is it within the content stack we're diversifying, but as we're iterating it, like month over month, we're adapting, we're changing, we're looking at what we're learning and what we're getting better. Meaning content stack 3 months from now should be more effective than content stack today if we're doing this correctly. Do you have any other comments or questions, Jackson?
I think Yvonne actually had an interesting comment, and I hear this from time to time when I'm talking to folks who are working in B2B spaces, where they're like, well, I don't really know, how valuable Facebook is, for example. But Yvonne says, we use Facebook to promote our corporate cultures and values and to show all the wonderful, fun things that we do as a team and for our communities. And that's how they sort of use Facebook to derive value and really deliver a positive message to their audiences, which I really like that, Yvonne. I think that makes a lot of stuff. Or that makes a lot of sense, and that makes a lot of the content you're creating valuable. She also says that helps them to recruit good talent as well.
Well, and I think one of the things is that I would emphasize is that sometimes the same type of content could be deployed for different purposes within a company, Jackson. As you know, and I think Yvonne's comment highlights that, right? It's like, this may be a bit of thought leadership that's good for, getting sales leads, but it actually might be good for recruiting if spun a different way and presented a different way. And it also might be good for just like employee morale, right? Or team member morale, because this is something cool that people can get behind. But it also could be good for like positioning the C-suite as thought leaders and executive thought leadership that kind of gives them their own unique profile. Like that might all come from the same white paper or same study. And generally, if you think in these stackable content pillars, you might deploy it for multiple purposes in one content stack. And that's sometimes what people don't remember, because if you just do the monolithic single channel content, it generally only has one purpose, right? You're not using that same monolithic thing for recruiting and sales leads. But in this case, you actually can piece it out.
You actually hit on something, Ben, there that I think is really interesting. I think frequently, particularly in smaller companies or mid-sized companies, there's an audience that we often forget about, and that's our own employees, right? I think that, sort of hitting on that audience and saying, we have all this great content, can it be repurposed for internal audiences as well? I think that's an interesting and often overlooked opportunity to communicate, really.
So one, it can get them inspired. Two, it can get them trained. Maybe it's like, you want them to understand this because they could do their jobs better. Three, these days, it's like your employees might be your best people to share this, right? You might be 100-person company. That's having 100 people share this, if they're inspired, is worth a lot to you, right? So all of those are important reasons.
Absolutely. I have a specific question coming in right now from John Collado, who I think this is a good kind of tactical question. He says, in terms of images, do you advocate reusing them across channels to connect the thought processes, or should they evolve through time and in different channels?
Well, I would say I often like to try different images, because a lot can, it's just like, you just sort of like got to get noticed, for instance, on social in a news feed. So I like trying new things, but when I find something that works, I often will ladder with it. We'll build on it, right? So you'll see that like, oh, this kind of image is just like getting really high engagement. So then I will often reuse it as long as it's appropriate to the channel. But sometimes we'll try different approaches. We'll like to diversify, and we will notice certain patterns of the images, like certain things. Like we do a lot of work for pet brands, for instance, and we know like a big visual close up of a pet, something where you can see in the eyes, you can kind of almost see the soul of the pet or the animal, will perform better. So over time, if that photo is rare, we will adjust and reuse photos that we know will perform well. But especially early on, we'll use kind of diverse things. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with using the same photo. I don't think we do that to keep the message cohesive. I think that's from the message itself. But when you find something that works, you definitely want to reuse it. Let me share my screen again and kind of do the sort of final section here, and then we'll end on some final questions. Let's talk about what is the best way to create a process for stackable content. In our ideal world, let's talk about an 8-step process. So step number 1, and this is a process that one of our agencies, PR Hacker, uses a lot when it's doing a lot of content marketing. So step 1 of the process is determine your pillar content. That becomes really important because, right, we've just sort of like created this hierarchy of content. It's not all created equal. There's pillar content on one side and there's nano content on the other. So we've got to get first things first, which is that pillar content. So here is an example that I just pulled from one of our fintech clients about, defining the pillar content. You could call it like, what is it going to be? In this case, they're making monthly content. We have other clients that are making weekly content, right? So we'll have a pillar content defined per week. So here we're looking at everything from the impact of COVID-19 on global payment systems is one piece of pillar content. We have another one that's the power of localized payment experiences. We have another one that's explaining fintech as a service. Another one that's cash is king, digital solutions for a cash-centric economy. So these are all for kind of a B2B fintech company, different pillar content samples that we're building out. This is what it looks like when we build it out for the year. Then step 2 in our ideal stackable content process is we align on the pillar content capture method. So what is the way that we're going to capture this pillar content? I can tell you for us, we do a lot of content capture for both ourselves and our clients, where we're going to deliver some type of either video or webinar or podcast or spoken sort of pillar content. Why? Because we're just faster at creating it than long form writing. For some clients that are great at long form writing, we might adjust that. But for a lot, we might say, okay, our pillar content capture method is going to be a podcast episode, or it's going to be a video interview, or it's going to be a webinar. And then we'll take that and then we'll capture it there and then start thinking about how we reuse another way. So one of the parts that's important is, how are you creating your pillar content in the format that is the easiest and best for you? And that's really unique. And I have some clients that go like, we're going to go with the sort of video spoken method and build from there. Others will say we're going to go with the written method and derive other things the opposite way. Step number 3 is convert pillar content into other modalities. What I mean by this is, let's say you're creating your pillar content from a webinar or from a video or a conference speech or a podcast episode. What you will often do is then get a high quality transcription of that. So if you're using something like Otter, which is an automated service, we'll get that automatic, which they're getting better now, so you can get a pretty good transcript. We'll transcribe it in Otter, then have an editor go through and edit that to make that in a format that's more usable before that gets sent to other members of the content team, or if we're a smaller company, the same members that are going to process it in different ways. So that's kind of like the spoken content creation approach to written. Now, if we have things the opposite way, we're writing long form content, then we'll start looking at how do we pull out bits and pieces and turn it into outlines or talking points that could be in a webinar or that could be in a conference presentation. How do we start pulling out pieces? We'll go the opposite direction. So the key to do this efficiently is basically, can you align on your best content creation method, and then can you adapt it quickly to other modalities in which you'll deliver it? Step number 4 is we'll prototype potential macro content templates. So we have this pillar content, we'll sort of say, okay, if our macro pieces, maybe we're thinking that this could be a blog post, this could be an infographic, this could be a Medium article, this could be, a kind of longer newsletter article. We'll start looking at that. And so this is what it looks like. This is to use that kind of fintech client example again. We'll say, okay, our pillar content is the impact of COVID-19 on global payment systems. And are we going to do 1 or 2 or 3 or all 3, where we're going to have like, here's what a blog post could be based on it. Here's what a LinkedIn article could be. Here's what a social series might look like. So we'll start thinking at it, and then we'll actually, usually early on, if we're new to stackable content, we'll start prototyping what does a blog post look like for us? What does a LinkedIn article look like? How is it different than a blog post? What is a social series that is more in discrete pieces? What does that look like? So this is how we sort of, again, the point being prototype potential macro content templates. Then step number 5 is we'll brainstorm new micro content headlines. So we'll say, yeah, we're coming at it from this angle. In this case, payment systems and COVID-19, but then let's brainstorm new micro content angles and let's do something totally different. For instance, on, the coin shortage in the US and how, stores didn't have enough coins. They were short on coins, and no one really wanted to use coins anyway during the pandemic. So let's go in with that as the lead instead of this global payment system approach. Let's do the headline based on the US coin shortage. So we'll brainstorm lots of micro content headlines. And the idea is, can we have different ways to get to enter and engage with our content to pull us into the overall content stack? Now, this is what a channel guide looks like. So I mentioned that earlier, that, what is the purpose? So we'll build this out. I mean, we have general guidelines, but we'll build it out for each brand or each client of ours, saying, okay, what is our purpose of a long form blog versus a short form blog? How is that different than an infographic? What about a long form YouTube video versus a short form video? What is the purpose of that compared to a press release, or a press release with an infographic, or a tweet with a graphic? So we'll go ahead and define all those things. We'll define what is the purpose of each channel for us. Then we'll actually define what is the content and what is the tone for each channel. So we can do that as we start doing headlines. So that's why we might end up with the coin shortage headline that's super timely for Twitter, but we might do the global payments method headline for LinkedIn, let's say. Brings us to step number 6, identify compelling nano snippets. So these are snippets or sound bites. So we might go through that long form piece, like let's say that webinar, that podcast episode we did got transcribed. And we might say, what are all the little things in this that are just like sound bites, little snippets of things that are interesting? It might be something kind of off topic. It might have been an aside. It might have been a question that someone answered. So what are all the little things that could stand alone as little pieces of content that comes from that transcript? And here's an example of, we have different stackable content, what we call blueprints. So one of the things unique about all the agencies within TOP, and I should mention TOP stands for Test, Optimize, and Perform. That's our methodology across lots of different disciplines. Today, we're talking about content marketing. So this is one of our blueprints that helps us ideate and test things. And this one's called True False. I want to give you an example of what a nano content blueprint looks like. So we will actually create, for this blueprint, we have 30 plus different stackable content blueprints for nano content. And this one's called True or False. This is about, let's engage our audience by making them guess whether a statistic or insight from our pillar content is true or false. So we'll actually ask the question, true or false, and we'll use it to engage people, and then we'll reveal the answer about this interesting tidbit that we have, let's say, from this data study. So this is an example of a blueprint that we use for nano content. And then step 7 in this process is that we'll measure real-time performance. So we got to know how we're doing. And you know what? We can't wait until the end of the year, the end of the quarter. We've got to know how we're doing, because one of the things about an iterative content process like stackable content is you can still tweak things that come later down in the content stack. So if we measure real-time performance, we can know how we're doing. So to the question I think earlier about, do we reuse this image or not? If we see how the image is doing, we can see our engagement, we can see what the open rate is, we can see what the click-through rate is. We see that one's performing better. If we know that faster, we can adapt, which is step number 8, which is derive new content based on the top performers. So this doesn't have to be like you plan your monthly calendar, you got your 20 pieces of content in your content stack, and that's set, and you never change anything. As you see things perform well, you can adapt things, you can edit. We might even A/B test. If we see that, like, oh, this photo is performing great, let's A/B test that in a micro or nano content with this photo. Let's add it to the mix. Let's see how it does. So that's step 8 in the process, is derive new content based on top performers. And then the cool part is, if you did all of that, then you get to repeat the content stack next week, or 2 weeks from now, or next month, and then you can use those insights to get better. So I'm just going to pause there, Jackson, before I end on my final thought of the day. And for everyone watching, is there any kind of final questions, comments? And just to reiterate, this is kind of the stackable content process, and I'll put it on the screen one more time as Jackson, you kind of look if there's any final questions or comments. So 1, you determine your content pillar. 2, you align how you're going to capture that content pillar. 3, you convert that content pillar, however it's captured, into other forms like video to text or text to video. 4, you prototype potential macro content templates. 5, you then try to reinvent it with new micro content headlines. 6, you make compelling nano content snippets. You might use a blueprint as you get better at this. 7, you measure performance. And 8, you apply your learnings to additional content. And then you do it all over again. So Jackson, comments or questions?
Yeah, two great questions coming from John. The first one, and I sort of gave my initial impression of this, but would love to hear your thoughts. John said, do you put out CTAs on all channels at early stages of the funnel or only on the site itself? Now, my impression on this, Ben, and I'd be interested to see if you agree or disagree, is that on channels particularly like Facebook, right, where people are going to kind of consume content, it's more of a casual atmosphere. You really have to be careful about, not wanting to fatigue your audience with a call to action in every single piece of content, right? In a lot of channels, you sort of have to put forth, 3, 4, 5 pieces of content between calls to action because you're wanting to provide a lot of value before you're asking something of your audience.
Well,
that's my. I'd love to hear your.
Actually, I would say yes, but I would actually build on that, which is what I would say is that actually the call to action per channel is very different. It doesn't mean not every call to action is like buy this. So on Facebook, to use your example, we might just be trying to get people, the call to action really is to just engage with the post.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Or we might try to get them to, like, if we're like sharing a link to something else, we're just trying to get them to read something. And once we're there, we're going to pixel them. And then we're going to eventually like get them in, have, kind of normal process, awareness, consideration, validation, purchase. So if we know where we are in that sales funnel, the call to action at this maybe one channel is just to make them aware. And then we're going to, get them, 3 steps later after they've engaged, and we're going to give them like more of a harder, here's the product and here's the benefit part. So I would say there's usually some type of call to action every channel, but sometimes it's not a hard sell call to action at all. It is appropriate for the channel.
Yeah, I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And John, I hope that answers your question. The other question that John had that I think is a good question and one, Ben, that you might have some good insight into. He asked, has COVID changed, increased, or decreased the usage of different channels in varying markets? I think the answer to that's absolutely yes. And I'd be interested.
And actually, the answer to that is I'm gonna do it like celebrity chef Emeril Lagasse. The answer is like, bam. Like digital content, like open rates up 50%, click-through rates, depending on industry, anywhere up 60 to 80%. I mean, I would say like a lot of digital consumption of content, which is great, and a lot more, audiences that are sort of like kind of like there to reach. Now, a lot of people marketing on digital. Actually, there was huge opportunity right after the pandemic because everyone kind of like kind of really cut down their activities, cut down their marketing departments. There was a lot of that. So actually, it was a great time, like April, May, June, to have like total audience attention and less competition. That's come down a little bit as more companies are like kind of back in marketing mode again. But normal engagement metrics, everything is up. And I would say continued emphasis on a channel like LinkedIn, continuing to perform very well. And I think that's, I think it's kind of the golden age of LinkedIn right now. If you're looking for a channel that's doing very, very well. And certainly email marketing is also doing well right now too. Just a lot more people like sort of opening and consuming emails. Let me end on the kind of final thoughts of the day. One, I want to show you that there's different levels of how you can approach stackable content. So this is on a monthly cadence. I want to just kind of show you, like, for our clients, we have like kind of bronze stackable content clients, silver and gold, and you can do this on your own, and you could have high periods and low periods. So if you're a company with a drive period, right? Like it's like, oh, it's fall. This is typically our seasonal high point. You might be a lot more, aggressive in kind of that gold level of basically 4 pieces of pillar content a month. That's 1 per week. That means you're creating, 8 pieces of macro, 20 pieces of micro, 24 pieces of nano, all within a month. And then you might have other times where it's like the bronze level, where you're doing kind of 1 per month, and it's still great in terms of you're creating content efficiently, but it's not as high a level. And then we'll often, adjust based on the number of strategic pillars, based on the number of pillar content we have. We'll adapt the revision rounds because we'll kind of know how much time we're investing, and the number of channels will expand if we're doing kind of gold level or contract if we're doing bronze level. So the point I wanted to make is that what's nice about the stackable content methodology that we originated is that it can adapt based on how much you want to invest. You can still create content in this efficient, effective, scalable manner, and the time frame in which you're creating it adjusts. Like, is it per week? Is it per month? Is it per quarter? But you're still engaged in that efficient content creation method. And so either on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis, we can transform, using stackable content, a single piece of pillar content into more than 20 pieces of stackable content. And there's incredible efficiencies and great power in that, as we've seen. So let me end on kind of the final thought of the day. And Jackson, if there's any last questions, feel free to jump in. One thing I want to ask everyone is, what is the one thing in content marketing for you? You can tweet at me at Benjamin Kaplan, and I love responding on Twitter. And that is, what is the one thing that you either learned today that reinforced what you do? The thing that is new or surprising that you're going to do? What sticks with you? I always like to know this because, I attend a lot of webinars myself as an audience member. I attend a lot of conferences. I speak at a lot of conferences. And I always, for myself, I say, what is the one takeaway I get? If I forgot everything, but this one thing, what would that be? And I'd love to know what that is. Tweet at me. You can also put it in the chat room. Let's talk. I have many different emails, one for each agency. One I check a lot is ben.kaplan@prhacker.com. So if you want to email me, let me know there. And then Jackson's is actually, if you put in the chat too, jackson.carpenter@prhacker.com. Either of us are happy to be a resource for you. Let us know what your content marketing challenges are. If you're deploying stackable content for the first time, let us know how that's going. And of course, we'd also love to help you from an agency perspective. If you're like, this sounds great, but you want us to help you establish best practices first and then turn it over to your internal team, we can do that. If you want us to do half-day training session, we're happy to do that. Or if you want us to manage it all for you, we can do that too. And then finally, LinkedIn. Here's my LinkedIn address, and a little tip. If you don't do it before, hold up your LinkedIn app on your mobile phone to the screen. Find the little search bar where it has the QR code, click it, and you can scan someone else's QR code and it will take you right there. And that will take you to my page. I would love to connect with you. We can share content with each other on LinkedIn. And what I would actually say too is that I don't accept every LinkedIn request, but I do accept from anyone who attends my webinar. So just put in your request, just like attended your webinar on stackable content, and then we'll make sure to accept that, since we've hit some of the upper limits on LinkedIn by how many people you can accept. Okay, so with that being said, let me kind of end on the final thought of the day, which is that the process of content marketing and creating content is incredibly powerful, and it is worth investing in, because there are so many gains that you experience when you do a great job with content, meaning you become you learn your topic better when you do it. You make it more intrinsic to your team members when you create great content. You can recruit better from it. You can engage more sales leads. You can paint a better picture to your extended network of people that might be referrals or recommend you new customers or clients. You can do all of those things. So I think content marketing is really worthwhile to invest in, but do it efficiently. Get every bit of ROI you can from it. And I truly believe stackable content is the way to do that. I think 5 or 10 years from now, everyone's going to be creating content this way, because it's too good. You get too many results and too much ROI, and yet you put in less time investment, less money investment, and all of that. So it really truly is the best of both worlds. So what I would encourage you to do is not try to solve this all in one day, but start with your first content stack. Start with, what is something you did in the past, you already did, that could be pillar content? How do you derive macro, micro, and nano content from it? Make it as easy as possible to start off with, and you'll start experiencing some of these gains. And what I promise you is that once your team starts creating content in this way, they will not want to go back, because it is that much more efficient and effective. So thank you all for coming. That is the power of stackable content. Please email me, engage on LinkedIn, subscribe on YouTube, and I'll talk to you soon next week, where we're going to actually talk about rapid response PR is our next marketing topic. So look out for that. And we're going to talk about how you piggyback on everything your competitors are doing and their share of voice to increase share of voice of your own. All right. Take care, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.